All right, I hope you all have the chart that I've given out. And if you do, you got it close right there. Let's look at it for a second. When we, in between, I have the kings of Judah and the kings of Israel, and you'll see the writing prophets. And you'll see Micah down there. I have Micah misspelled, so you can correct that. But Micah, and then I have an arrow pointed down to Hezekiah. If we go to Micah chapter 1, you're going to find that he has some of these kings in this bracket listed. And so you also go over to the arrow, following the arrow back over, and you find that he was contemporary then also with Isaiah. So we have several of these prophets then that are prophesying close to the same time. There is some overlapping. Kind of like Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and Daniel. There's overlapping of these prophets. And so keep that in mind when you're studying this. In Jeremiah 26 and verse 18, it says, Micah the Morashite prophesied in the days of Hezekiah, king of Judah, and he spake to all the people of Judah, saying, Thus saith the Lord of hosts, Zion should be plowed like a field, and Jerusalem shall become heaps, and the mountain of the houses as the high places of a forest. And then we're going to notice some things then in Micah chapter 1 and verse 1 of when he prophesied also during these days of some kings there. So we'll notice that in just a little bit. But let's get some introduction work done. And we'll find that there were no writing prophets prior to the divided kingdom. So during the united kingdom, for that 120 years of Saul, David, and Solomon, there were no writing prophets. Now, they had some non-writing prophets, Elijah and Elisha, but we didn't find any writing. During the period then of the divided kingdom, what?
So when you say prior to the divided kingdom, that means during the days of David,
Saul, David, and Solomon.
Okay, gotcha.
Okay. Now, during
Sorry.
Okay, you caught up with me?
Yes.
All right, now during the days of the divided kingdom, there were 13, I think if I counted correctly, 13 writing prophets. Okay. Hosea, Joel, Amos, Jonah, Isaiah, Micah, Daniel, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Zephaniah, Nahum, Habakkuk, and Obadiah. Now, if you look on your chart again, you're going to see over on the left-hand side, you'll see Ezra, Nehemiah, Haggai, Esther, Zechariah, and Malachi. They all then prophesied later. They did when the children of Israel came back from Babylonian captivity. And so that's when they were prophesying. Okay? So you understand what I'm doing. I'm isolating these. This was then in the divided kingdom before they went into captivity. All right. Isaiah, Joel, and Micah were prophets to the kingdom of Judah.
Say that again.
Isaiah, Joel, and Micah were the prophets of the kingdom of Judah. All right. Amos was from the kingdom of Judah, but was sent to prophesy against the kingdom Israel. Now these others prophesied to the nations, or to, like Jonah and Nahum, to Nineveh. So they were to other nations, but these then are pretty much to the kingdom of Judah. All right, we've seen then that Micah was from the towns of Moresheth, Moresheth, Moresheth. We use the passage in Jeremiah 26 and verse 18, but also in Micah chapter 1 and verse 1. The word of the Lord that came to Micah, the Morehite, in the days of Jotham. And notice that he has in the days of Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah. So that gives us the date, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. All right. This city was in the western part of Judah. It was a city that was formerly had dependency on Gath.
G-A-T?
Gath. And that was one of the cities of the Philistines. There were 5 major cities. And this was one of those cities then that were part of that major cities.
5 major cities of the Philistines.
All right. By the conquest then of Uzzah, the whole territory then came into possession of Judah. He lived in the country, which would be then to the poor people of the day. He lived by the great international highway and was in position to observe the political movements of the day.
Can you say that one more time, please?
He lived by the great international highway. And there were really 2 highways. One went by the Mediterranean Sea just inside, and that was then and then there was one on the other side of the Jordan River. But those 2 major highways then, this one that was by the Mediterranean Sea or close to the Mediterranean Sea was considered the best highway, and that's the one where he lived. He lived close to that. And so he observed the political movements of the day. His name means who is likened unto Jehovah. The date is within 740 to 700 BC. He is contemporary of Isaiah. Now, we usually put Isaiah at 750 years, but there's some overlapping there. So that's okay. He also saw the end of Israel. And when I mean Israel, I'm talking about those 10 northern tribes. All right, that happened in 722 by the Assyrians. He saw the moral and religious corruption in Judah And that had to be under Jotham. He saw the reform works of Jehoshaphat. Then the utter decay of Ahaz. And then Hezekiah, he saw the Reformation. And that Hezekiah, the Reformation by Hezekiah was helped by Isaiah and by Micah. All right, now let's notice the conditions. The people were misled by deceivers, false prophets, the poor were abused, the prophets, and I'm talking about Micah's, the prophet then, had deep sympathy with those who were wronged. And his indignation against those who exercise cruelty.
You repeat that last part?
Let me find where I am. Oh, let's see. He showed a great indignation against those who exercise cruelty. This really gives us the picture of the day. There was a general decay of society. Sin was rampant in the official and family life. And because of that sin, then this will ruin any society. Right, there are fundamental moral laws underlying the structure and woven into every fabric of human society. There are fundamental moral laws underlying the structure and woven into every fabric of human society. When these are ignored and violated, disintegration then sets in, and the structure of the whole nation is sure to collapse.
The structure of the nation?
The whole nation is sure to collapse.
Sounds like us.
Yes, it does. We're not through with sounding like us today. You caught it? All right. The ruler sold the rights of men. I misspelled that word right there, and I don't know what that is. And the interests gained control of the land, or the rulers sold the rights of men, and they also
Gained interest.
they vested. I think that's supposed to be vested interest of the land, of control of the land. Wow. Taking away the privilege of the people. The wealthy coveted the land, chapter 2, verses 1 and 2.
What was that again?
2, 1 and 2.
Okay.
And robbed the poor, 2, 8. They cast women out of their possessions, 2, 9. Corrupt business ethics or practice, 6:11. People were under the control of false prophets, of the powerful false prophets, 2:11. Who prophesied for reward,
What was the scripture for under false prophet?
2:11. Who prophesied for reward, that's chapter 3, verses 6 and 11. The priest then taught for hire. Taught, yes, Taught. 3:11. The rulers in their greed were as cannibals. Chapter 3, 1 through 3 and 9. The judges judged for bribe, chapter 7, verse 3. The corrupt concept of God held by the people was little different from the heathen concept of their God. (3:11b). Okay, they kept the statutes of Omri and
Statues or statutes? Statues like statues or statutes like laws?
laws, I think,
Statutes of who?
of Omri, and walked in the counsel of Omri and Ahab, 6:16. These conditions then fanned the indignation of the prophet Micah into white heat.
Can you say that one more time? I'm sorry.
Okay. These conditions fanned the indignation of the prophet Micah into a white heat. And he held not back from declaring to the nation their sins. And I'll go over this again. And to the people their transgressions. He held not back from declaring to the nation their sins. And to the people their transgressions. Three 8. Now, religiously, let's talk about this for a little bit. Now, when you look at your chart and you see when he is prophesying, you'll find that Hezekiah is part of this, that he's prophesying during the time of Hezekiah. And Hezekiah then initiated great religious reforms. And you can find that in 2 Chronicles 29 through 31.
What was that?
2 Chronicles 29 through 31.
He initiated many religious reforms.
Yes. Or great religious reforms, however you want to say it. All right, the priests sanctified themselves and cleansed the inner part of the house of God. In Jerusalem, altars erected to the heathen deities were destroyed. In Jerusalem, altars erected to heathen deities were destroyed. And the true worship of God was restored. The feast and the sacrifices were kept. The singers and the players of instruments were once again employed as in the days of David. And we're setting the stage for when Micah is prophesying. So you've got to know this, and this is a little bit of the history then. And we're talking about the religious side of this history. All right. The altars and the pillars were broken down not only in Jerusalem, but throughout the land of Judah, Ephraim and Manasseh. So, all right, the altars and the pillars, and this is talking about those to the false gods, and then were broken down not only in Jerusalem, but throughout the land of Judah, Ephraim, and Manasseh. Some of those altars and pillars were go back to the time of Solomon. And also destroyed was the brazen serpent, which was set up by Moses. I think they at that time called it Nehushtan. Which had become an object of worship as an idol. All right, we're still on religious reforms. All the prophets went to the heart of the matter in condemning empty formality. Now, understand what was taking place during, here are the sacrifices and the feast and all of those have been instituted then when they were around Mount Sinai, which was 1400, I believe, something like that. So they've been going on for about 700 years or more, maybe more. But anyway, the feast and the sacrifices were becoming ritualistic.
Okay, you called it empty what?
Empty formality. If we look at Micah 6 and verse 8, which is a great text for a sermon, by the way. Who has showed thee, O man, what is good, and what doth the Lord require of thee, but to do justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with thy God? Yes. So you can talk about doing justly, you can talk about love, mercy, and then you talk about walking humbly with God. And as we talked about Jonah, he walked, with God, before God, and away from God. Those things there, you need to know that for the test too. But that's not what God meant. He always wanted this to be from the heart. And also understand something too, that some of the people will take this and say God does not want sacrifices and the feast, but God demanded those two as well. We have to be careful with such thing as the Lord's Supper. It can become empty formalism or ritualistic, and we need to not do that. We don't need to allow ourselves to get into that same situation. Some writers have mistakenly gone to the extreme of saying that the sacrificial system has no place with the prophet and was to be abandoned by them. Okay? But this is not the case. Okay? The sacrificial system was divinely appointed and was fulfilled in Christ. Understand, and I think you do, if you've been around me very much, all of those sacrifices pointed to Christ and were fulfilled in Christ.
And so you said the system was divinely appointed.
Yes,
and fulfilled in Christ.
That's right.
And all the sacrifices pointed to Christ.
That's right. And what the prophets then condemned was the empty, meaningless performances of these sacrifices. All right. Those offering the sacrifices relied upon the mere doing of the thing. Those offering the sacrifices relied upon the mere doing of the things and meeting their religious obligations. And they ignored the fact that what invested the performance of these sacrifices was of true significance, pointing to the sacrifice of Christ. Okay, they ignored the fact that what invested the performance of these sacrifices was the significance of pointing to the sacrifice of Christ, such as the Passover lamb. When John said, "Behold the Lamb of God, which taketh away the sins of the world," you need to go back and study Exodus chapter 12. All right, we are not so soon removed from the attitude of just doing the requirements of God in a meaningless, empty performance. Our songs can become that way. Our prayers can become that way. The partaking of the Lord's Supper can become that way. So we've got to guard against those things. All right. But Micah's giving the world hope. In chapter 4, verses 1 and 2, but in the last days it shall come to pass that the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established on top of the mountain, shall be exalted above the hills, and the people shall flow into it. And many nations shall come and say, Come ye, let us go, or come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of God of Jacob, and he will teach us of his ways, and we will walk in his paths. For the law shall go forth from Zion, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. Isaiah 2, verses 2 and 3. And then we drop over to Micah chapter 5 and verse 2. But thou, Bethlehem Ephrathah, though thou shalt be little among the thousands of Israel, yet out of thee shall come forth unto me that is to be a ruler of Israel. Micah 5 and verse 2. Whose goings forth have been from old and from everlasting. These two passages, then, is the hope. We find the mountain of the Lord's house would be established, the institution where hope is given. We also find that Micah is giving us the place of the birth of the Messiah, the hope of the world. In Matthew chapter 2 in verse, when we look at the context, when he had gathered, verse 4, this is Matthew chapter 2 and verse 4, when he had gathered all the chief priests and the scribes of the people together, he demanded of them where Christ should be born. Well, how were they going to know this? Well, and they said unto him, in Bethlehem of Judea, for thus it is written by the prophet, and thou Bethlehem in the land of Judah, art not least among the princes of Judah, for out of thee shall come a governor that shall rule my people Israel. That's Micah 5 and verse 2. So when they were asked where he was going to be born, that's exactly what they said. They quote this passage. To the people of the day, there was hope that the exile would end and they would be restored back to that land of promise. So you have an immediate context there, and then you have a further context. All right, further, the holiness of God and the righteousnesses of his government are stressed within this book. Now, God established this government.
Repeat that.
Okay. The holiness of God and the righteousness of his government are stressed within this book. His teachings are forceful and simple. Or his teaching is forceful and simple. As long as the people are doing right, they will enjoy his favor. When they turn away from him and his standard, they must suffer the consequences. And that's what the prophets are doing. They're telling them, here's the consequences. God's doing the same with us today. He's told us to serve him. If we don't, here's the consequences. All right, the goodwill of God. The goodwill of God cannot be attained by carefully observing rituals. But by observing his principles of right, his divine principles of right. But by observing his divine principles of right. A living fellowship with God must be maintained.
I get this off. Well, repeat that, please.
A living fellowship with God must be maintained by a spirit of humility, towards him, and by recognizing one's brotherly relationship to his fellow man.
Read that last part, recognizing.
One's brotherly relationship to his fellow man, kind of like what he does in 1 John 3 and 4. How can we, if we say that we
Love God and hate our brother.
Yes,
We're liars and the truth is in them.
that's right.
You know what it says?
Something like that.
Good enough.
All right. The prophet then combats the heathen practices that had entered into the nation. The social injustices are sternly rebuked as the people are brought before God. In a spiritual lawsuit. Still further, Micah's clear presentation of the messianic hope is among the most outstanding to be found in all the prophets.
Is the most outstanding? Did you say it's the?
Among the most outstanding to be found in all the prophets. All right, he sees the mountain of God's house above all other powers and kingdoms.
Okay.
He beholds God in his righteousness. Ruling and judging among the nations. This would be accomplished through a ruler born in Bethlehem who would be co-eternal with God. This is accomplished ruler born in Bethlehem who would be co-eternal with God. The enemies would be beaten down. And in contrast, the Messianic kingdom would shine among all nations of the earth. Right? The enemies would be beaten down. And in contrast, the Messianic kingdom would shine among all nations of the earth. Right. Now, Micah took the cardinal teaching of Amos.
Cardinal?
Of Amos, Hosea, and Isaiah.
Amos who in Isaiah?
Yes.
Amos.
You have Amos, Hosea, and Isaiah, and bound them into one embarking statement, which includes all. Now we've seen this in some of this that we've talked about, talking about the minor prophets. Amos then emphasized the need of justice. Hosea showed the reaches of the loving kindness of God. Isaiah pleads with the people to have humble fellowship with God. And then Micah brings this all together in a striking declaration. What does God require of thee? To do justly, to love kindness, and walk humbly with God. Of course, that's 6:8. Micah brings all of these together in a striking declaration. What doth God require of thee? To do justly, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with God. All righty.
9 pages.
Got that on 2 pages.
Well, I'll skip blanks and all.
All right. We're in Micah. And what I want to do is notice the text now. And we're going to combine a couple of books here. I have a new book. It's called The Minor Prophets by James E. Smith. I got that during the Memphis School of Preaching lectureship. It's pretty expensive. It's $35. And I got it from Tucker Williams, the Christian Family Bookstore up in Chattanooga. So if you want that,
Books.com.
Yeah, it'll be tuckerbooks.com. It's a good book. It gives you something different than what the text is talking about. He goes into some words and defines some words that Homer Haley does not do. I think both of them together does a good job. All right. So when we look at Micah 1, and verse 1, it says, the word of the Lord came to Micah, the Morashite, the days of Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, the kings of Judah, which he saw concerning Samaria and Jerusalem. So really, he's not just talking about Judah. And he uses the capitals here as Samaria that's the capital of the area. And then Jerusalem is also the capital of Judah at that time. So he's using those two cities to stand for the whole nation. And then Micah is stating that the word of the Lord came from God. And that's to stress the divine origin of his words.
Samaria was the capital of what? Assyria?
No, Samaria is the capital of Israel.
Israel.
It's in the middle of the land. If you look at a map and you go from the bottom of the Sea of Galilee to the Dead Sea, the top of the Dead Sea, and you go in between those two, you'll find then Samaria is right there.
Okay, just making it.
Okay.
I hope it's not my grandchildren. Well, Robin's please.
I saw that. There's some ideas here too with this word, that the word of the Lord came to Micah, and the verb is a technical term embracing all divine revelation. And in the case of this revelation, it may have been more auditory than visual. You got to understand how God, who had sundry times and divers manner spake in time past to the fathers by the prophet, hath in these last days.
It was more in his mind, auditory. He heard God's word.
Right, he heard God's word. And he spoke in dreams and that type of thing. That's some of those, is how divine revelation came to be. Are you texting?
I'm texting him.
The idea is that the prophet inwardly perceived certain facts through the influence of the Holy Spirit. All right. So this book really contains one message, but it's through both people, both groups of
both groups of people.
Yes.
One message to Israel and Judah.
That's right. If Judah didn't straighten up, they were going to go through the same thing that Israel was going through. All right. Let's take a little break here, and we'll come back in about 10 minutes or so.
He said, yes, ma'am, they're here with me at Eli's ball game. And I put, great, things like this scare me. They're such gorgeous boys, someone would take them, then I'd have to kill someone.
And they would not find the bodies.
Uh-uh. You ain't the only one. You're pinching me. I guess that feels good to you.
Mm-hmm.
Can't do that in Mariana. Can you?
Mm-hmm.
That felt good. My neck. I got this morning with it hurting because I slept so hard, my ear hurt. I slept 11 hours.
You were out of it when I left.
I know. I needed it. Like I'm falling apart. We're about to plan a trip or something.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to go to Charleston right now. They're flooding.
You're not gonna like what I'm gonna do, but I'm gonna do this.
No.
You could twist
Okay, okay.
it. Fix it right.
Oh, that's a good excuse.
But you're gonna have to take it off to fix it.
That would be perfect for you, wouldn't it? Oh. Okay. They're just getting old. Everything's getting old. I'm feeling my mortality. When's our break? 30?
Mm-hmm. Melissa said finally the sun finally came out this afternoon.
It's going to take 3 or 4 days for that stuff to dry, what we saw on the Weather Channel. God bless those people whose children are missing. I hope they just wandered off. They'll find them.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, not just that somebody took them, they could wander into some pit or something.
Yeah.
I got a bathroom.
Dixon,
Uh-huh.
was that James Smith that you said that book was by?
Yes, James E. Smith.
Okay, thank you, sir.
All right, I've got time to start again. In verse 2, it says, "Hear, all you people, hearken, O earth, and all that is therein, and let the Lord be witness against you, and the Lord from his holy temple." So the entire earth is called upon to witness the case against the covenant people of God. And this language is also used in Old Testament hymnic passages.
In hymns,
Hymnic, H-Y-M.
would that be
N-I-C.
like hymns?
Yes,
Sing?
yeah. Which underscore the universality, the universal kingship of God.
Sorry, it took so long.
That's right. And in this passage also we find that God is called Lord, the Lord God from his holy temple, or the Lord from his holy temple. The Lord here is, or sovereign, is what he's talking about. And he is the authoritative ruler of the entire earth. The earth and its fullness is subject to him. And the God of Micah is not a providential deity.
What do you mean by that?
All right. Back then, they would have cities that would be, like the Philistines would have their gods.
Yeah.
And that would be just the gods in those Philistines in that area, those
So
five
this has nothing
cities.
to do with providence. This means he's not a deity belonging to just one little group of people.
That's right.
Okay. Okay.
He is the king to which all nations are accountable. And he is the ultimate judge. And then it's coming from his holy temple. In the Hebrew language, this one word, the holy temple, can indicate both temple or palace. And with the case of God, deity and kingship are intertwined.
Kingship and what are intertwined?
Deity. Here, the royal residency of the sovereign Lord is sanctified as a temple by his holy presence.
Repeat, please.
Right here, the royal presence of the sovereign Lord.
You said the royal residency.
Royal residency, yes, right.
Okay, of the sovereign Lord.
Of the sovereign Lord is sanctified as a temple by his holy presence. And it's like the church when it meets together. There is God in its midst. The reference here is probably to the heavenly temple.
You can do this in 2 nights.
Probably 3.
Okay, go ahead.
Uh,
Are we done verse 2?
no, we've got a little bit more on, because we see also that in the passage, we find that God is a witness and he is acting as a giver of evidence and the accuser.
And he is the accuser.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
And he's also the judge. He's about to judge his people.
Okay.
All right. Now, when the judgment upon Israel and Judah is taking place, this should warn other nations. You got to understand Edom, Moab, those nations round about them, Assyria, Babylon, those nations also. This should serve as a warning. That they're going to have to face the wrath of the heavenly judge. All right, the intervention of God, Micah chapter 1, verses 3 through 5.
Chapters 1 through?
No, chapter 1, verses 3 through 5.
Is the intervention of God?
Uh-huh.
The notes are so sloppy. Okay, go ahead.
All right, now I'm going to read the text. It says, "For behold, the Lord cometh forth out of his place, and will come down and tread upon the high places of the earth. And the mountains shall be molten under him, and the valleys shall be cleft and as wax, and the fire and the waters that are poured down a deep steep. For the transgression of Jacob is all this, and for his sins of the house of Israel. What is the transgression of Jacob? Is it not Samaria? And what is the high places of Judah? Are they not Jerusalem?" So when he starts, then he says, "For behold." So he is then getting their attention. Here is the surprise and sudden action of God. And it says that he cometh forth out of his place. This verb then is a verb that is frequently used of going out to war. And the participle indicates the nearness of action.
The going? Or
Yeah. Now he would go out.
cometh.
Yeah.
It means what?
The nearness of the action. All right, now he's going from his palace. This is a figure of speech then.
It's his place.
Well, yes.
Same thing though.
From his place. What did I say? Palace?
Palace, yeah.
From his place. It's called theophanies. Theophanies.
Theanies. Theophany?
Yeah. Theophanies.
And that's from his holy place.
From his place, yes.
From his place. What does that mean?
All right, here he's talking about his place would be the throne of heaven. And he will descend to the earth.
What does theophanies mean? Is it giving a worldly description of a heavenly being?
Yes. And then there's that anthropomorphic expression that he's using too, the walking. Okay. Now he's coming down from heaven to earth and he touches the mountains. This denotes a victorious march of a conqueror. And notice the effect in verse 4, the effects of his coming. Okay? The mountains shall be molten under him. Here is the mountain melts in a volcanic eruption. And if you go back to Exodus, what was taking place around when God then came down, Exodus 19, before, as he was giving the 10 Commandments, then this is the type of idea. Hebrews chapter 12 talks about it, that Moses even exceedingly feared and quaked because of what they were seeing from God.
Shook the
Yes.
lightning flash.
Yes, and
the
all of
fire
this. Okay.
blazed. Yeah.
All right, the language conveys God coming in power and action.
That's like the end of time.
Yes, how could the mere man stand in the presence of such a God?
Can't.
When the most substantial of Earth's topography cannot endure his coming.
He made it, he can take it out.
That's right. Now, in verse 5, he's talking about the reason for his coming, for the transgression of Jacob. The word transgression then points to rebellion, breaking free of obligations. And then he talks about sin, and sin then is that word that we talk about, missing the mark. And understand, when we miss the mark, we can either fall short or we can far exceed it. And in this case, since he's talked about in verse 1, he's talking about Samaria and Jerusalem. In verse 5, then he talks about Samaria and Judah. So he's talking about the entire nation. There are 4 rhetorical questions. All right. Number one is, what is the transgression of Jacob? And his answer is the second rhetorical question.
Okay.
Is it not Samaria? And this was the capital. It was the seat of the government. It was the headquarters of idolatry. This was where Ahab and Jezebel ruled. This city became a great cesspool of moral corruption. All right, the third question he asked, what is the high places of Judah? And the high places then are often linked with idolatry. A lot of times in the Old Testament, when you refer to the high places, they're talking about places of worship for idols.
What Jeroboam
Yes. Well,
said he moved to the high place.
yes, but Solomon also made high places in the area there too.
So they would talk about one judge after the other, and they never destroyed the high place.
That's right. One king right after the other.
Okay, one king. Okay, number
All right.
4.
All right. Now, these idols should have been destroyed according to Deuteronomy chapter 12, verses 11 through 14. And then, as he did in the first question, he answers this question with the fourth rhetorical question: is it not Jerusalem? And of course, this is the capital of the southern kingdom. And it was no longer the Lord's sanctuary. You understand, this is where the temple was built.
And you said it was not what kind of sanctuary?
The Lord's sanctuary.
Okay.
The city was filled with high places, Jeremiah 32:35.
32 verse 35.
Uh-huh. And all of these high places then virtually made Jerusalem itself a high place. Right now, Hezekiah tried to remove all of these high places in 2 Chronicles 31:1. All right, now, the sin of the northern kingdom was apostasy and rebellion. The sin in the southern kingdom was unauthorized worship centers. One fellow says, here's the capital punishment for the capital cities. All right. Now he's going to talk in verses 6 and 7 about the fate of Samaria. It says, therefore I will make Samaria as a heap of the field, as a planting of the vineyard. I will pour down the stones thereof into the valley, and I will discover the foundations thereof. And all the graven image thereof shall be beaten to pieces, and all the hires thereof shall be burnt with fire, and all the idols thereof I will lay desolate. For she gathereth it of the hire of a harlot, and they shall return the hire of a harlot. Now, there are 4 specific statements about the fate of Samaria. Number 1, he's going to make the city a great heap, a pile of stones. This is what Assyria would do. They would make the cities into a rubbish heap.
Cities, plural.
Yes, cities that they destroyed. All right, number 2, it would be the planting place for vineyards.
Planting place.
As a planting of a vineyard. The city would remain so long in ruins that vineyards would be laid out upon it. The great urban metropolis would revert to a rural countryside. Right, number 3. He threatens to pour down her stones to the valleys. All right, now you understand how these ancient cities would be built, and they'd be built upon a hill. When the walls were destroyed, the stones that would tumble into the surrounding valleys. In Samaria, this would be some 300 feet. Fourth, the foundations would be laid bare. The palaces and the bastions of the city would be destroyed to their very foundations.
Palaces and bastions. Would like with what? I'm sorry, my mind went blank.
The cities would be destroyed to their very foundations.
Okay.
And then verse 7, it talks about the fate of religion, false religions. And all the graven images thereof shall be beaten in pieces, and all the hires thereof shall be. All right, we read that. Okay. 3 statements are made with regarding to the fate. Of the paraphernalia of the false religions. Paraphernalia.
Almost. Camps and hand grenades. The horseshoes. Okay, number one.
All right. Her false images shall be crushed.
Okay.
All right, this is the same terminology used in the smashing of the golden calf at Mount Sinai. Second, the prostitutional wages shall be burned by fire. And this goes back to Hosea. And Hosea stressed the northern state religion was idolatry. And he uses the term the harlot's fee. Micah then suggests that the worshipers regarded the crops and other materials as wages paid by the fertility gods. Micah suggests that the worshipers regarded the crops and other material blessings as wages paid by the fertility god. See, the god paid them then for serving them. The gods, yes, paid them. Paid the people for serving them, the gods.
What people wanted to do.
All that would be burned with fire. The torches of the enemies may ignite the fire, but God directed them against Samaria. Thirdly, God threatens to make their image desolate without worshipers.
Image? To make their image?
Their image is, her image is desolate. Okay, destroy then the images themselves, and they would be without worshipers.
Okay.
Thousands were slain and 10,000s were carried away into captivity. We're talking about the Assyrian captivity. So this is against
10,000 were taken.
yes, tens of thousands. Now understand I said 3, but here's number 4.
Typical messes up. I mean, there's some
I know.
are so messy right now.
I know he's
I
got
can't
3.
spell anything tonight.
Well,
They had to do paraphernalia.
join the club.
Okay.
All right, the idols would return to their wages of prostitution. The gold and the silver paid for religious prostitution would be melted down to make decorative coverings for idols.
Can you say that last part one more time?
All right. The gold and the silver paid for religious prostitution had been melted down to make decorative covering for idols.
Good.
These enemy soldiers then would come in and tear down and tear away the gold and the silver and spend that for further prostitution. This all happened in 722 BC. The Assyrians came in. The excavations show that the city was burned at the time. We're talking about Samaria.
Now, you're saying all of it happened in 722 BC
That's
when
right.
Assyria came in?
Yes, came in and destroyed Samaria.
And the archaeological expeditions.
Excavations show that at least part of the city was burned at that time. Assyrian records indicate that 27,290 persons, 27,290
Okay. What?
were taken from Samaria. All right. So here is then verses 8 and 9, and this is the lament over the approaching judgment. And therefore I will wail and howl and will go stripped and naked, and I will make a wailing like the dragons in the morning as owls. For whose wound is incurable, for it is coming to Judah. He is come unto the gate of my people, even to Jerusalem. All right, so here is God descends from his heavenly throne and he moves southward, then from Samaria to Judah, and ultimately to Jerusalem.
Okay. Descends from his heavenly throne going southward.
To Judah and ultimately to Jerusalem. Okay, so here is Samaria in the middle of the land. He's going south to Judah, and then he'll hit Jerusalem. All right, now there are three phrases describing his lamentation.
Is Micah's?
Yes. Micah then first, number 1 says, he must mourn and wail. To wail was to intensify mourning to the ultimate extreme. Wailing was usually accompanied by the pounding of the breast. Through this display, then, of grief, Micah underscored the desperate plight of the people and his compassion of those people.
Underscored the plight and his passion.
And compassion. All right, now, number 2, this is still talking about the 3 phrases. This is number 2. Micah would go stripped and naked. This does not mean nude. Okay. But it means poorly dressed, without the upper garment.
So he's underdressed.
Yes, this was then to stress defeat and humiliation. Thirdly,
Number 3.
yes, the third phrase.
All right.
He will make lamentations. And I think the King James has dragons and the mourning of owls. So Micah would be familiar. Since he's the country prophet, he would be familiar with the high-pitched howls and yelps of the jackals at night. First time I heard owls, I thought a woman was outside the house screaming.
I've never anything to hear peacock.
When I was in the travel trailer up at Bankston,
Mm-hmm.
And I was by myself, man, it scared me to death.
Peacocks scare you to death too. They sound like a woman running and being beat.
Yeah. All right. So let's see.
So the Lamentations, which to me is a statement of mourning and crying and sadness, but the King James says the wailing of dragons and mourning as the owl.
Yes. So here's their sounds that they make when they are in grief.
Okay.
Okay.
Gotcha.
All right. Now he's going to talk about the explanation of this in verse number 9. Okay. And he gives 3 reasons. Her wounds are incurable. Of course, this must refer to Samaria. And this has probably, and I say probably, there's some other explanations, but we're going to go with this one. Refers to the damage administered by God.
That number 2?
No, this is still number 1.
Refers to what?
Refers to the damage administered or about to be ministered by God.
Okay.
All right. Number 2. It has come to Judah. This means Samaria what happened to Samaria would also come to Judah. The wounds were infectious and incurable.
Okay.
All right. Then Micah weeps.
Is number 3?
Yes, number 3.
Okay.
And he weeps for the people with a prophetic eye. The prophet could see the judgment approaching the capital. And he has genuine feelings for the fate of the capital. The expression, my people, is used 9 times in the book.
Wait a minute. My people 9 times.
It indicates empathy. All right. The rest of this is really some interesting play on words that Micah is going to use. Verses 10 through 16. Really some interesting things here. And one author divides it into different sections Let's see if I can find out. There's the first, there's the second, there's the fourth. Okay, he gives four remarks, four different sections of towns, okay?
Of towns?
Uh-huh. First, the 5 towns are mentioned only here, okay? They have no mention of them anywhere else.
There's 5 towns?
That are mentioned. We're going to notice them because what their name means and what happens is very interesting.
Okay.
All right. Second, 4 of the towns mentioned are fortified cities protecting Jerusalem.
The towns are fortified cities.
Mm-hmm. Protecting Jerusalem. So you have to go through these towns to get to Jerusalem.
Okay.
Thirdly, the unit is bracketed by anonymous exhortations.
Oh my goodness. Unit. Say it again.
Is bracketed by anonymous exhortations.
Okay.
All right. Then, fourthly, the prophet alludes to 5 cities prior to Jerusalem and 5 after.
Say that again when I'm tired. Prophets allude.
5 cities prior and 5 cities after. Jerusalem is called the gate of my people. That's the center of it. So he's focusing on the destruction of Jerusalem. We're not talking about AD 70. We're talking about 606. All right, now, as we look at these things, he says, declare ye it not in Gath. Weep ye not at all in the house of Ephraim. Roll thyself in the dust. And I want to stop there because Gath means tell town.
What?
Gath.
Means what?
Tell, T-E-L-L dash town.
What does that mean?
Means that's where you go tell it.
Tell what?
Whatever it is.
Oh, like a judgment seat? Or a
It's
courthouse?
just a name.
Okay. But why do they call it tell town?
I have no idea, but that's what the name means.
Okay.
Okay. But he says, tell it not.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't tell it in tell town. Okay.
Okay.
In Aco, or the next town that he mentions, well, he has Afra.
Afra.
Okay.
Okay.
It's Weep town.
Weep
town. And he says, weep not. And I'm not going to go through all of these, but then Beth El Ephra.
I don't see that.
Well, maybe in the American Standard, but we're going to.
Ezel. There's Beth Ezel.
Well, we're going to go with what he's got right here in Homer Haley's book.
Okay, what do you call it?
Beth, B-E-T-H-E-L-A-P-H-R-A-H.
And that's Beth Ezel. Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
Dust town. Roll thyself in dust. Pass by the inhabitants of Shave-Fry. Okay, the inhabitants of Saphir. That's Fairtown.
H-I-P-H-R.
I-R.
I-R is what?
Fairtown. And you're going to pass by it in nakedness and shame.
Okay.
The citizens of Zananan.
Yeah, I got that one.
Okay. That means March Town. March not forth.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. Then the morning of Bethazel, Bethl-Ezel.
Yeah.
Neighbor town. Taketh from you its standing place. The inhabitants of Maroth, Maroth, which is bitter town, is in travail about good.
Yeah.
All right, because evil hath come down from Jehovah to the gate of Jerusalem.
Right.
Bind the chariot to the swift horses, thou inhabitants of Lachish, horse town.
Okay.
She is the beginning of sin for the daughter of Zion. For the transgression of Israel are found in thee. Therefore wilt thou, O Zion, give dismissal, farewell presents to Morsheth Gath, the possession of Gath. The house of Akzib, Fault Springs becomes Akzab.
Wait a minute, I lost my place. It was Axib me.
A disappointing brook to Israel's king.
Okay.
And I will bring the heir, that's Sargon, Sargon, king of Assyria, to thee. Thou citizens of Mersha, that's Hairtown, Heirtown.
Hair, like a hair on your head?
No, Heir.
Oh, okay, air, like air. Okay, like an heir to property.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Unto Adullam,
Yeah.
that's the wild beast cave, shall the glory of Israel come. David fled from Saul in this area too. Make thyself bald, O Zion, for the children of delight. And the baldness, I understand, is the vultures, and he mentions enlarge the baldness of the vultures. There were certain vultures of that area would have certain bald spots on their head. And so one of them was larger than the other, so he was telling them to enlarge the baldness.
So it means the vultures.
Yeah, well, yes, but he's enlarging their baldness, and that's talking about some of the mourning and some of the things that they've gone through. For they are gone in captivity from thee. Okay.
I was thinking about what baldness meant back then. Meant the woman of shame. You know, make shame.
Yeah. Let's see. Let me find it here. He goes into it in this one.
Oh. Oh.
What verses is that in about the baldness?
1:16.
All right, here it is. The worst calamity was the greater bald spot. Here Zion is told to enlarge the bald spot as the eagle. The reference is probably to one of the two species of vultures which were common in Egypt and Palestine. One vulture is bald in the front of the head and the neck. The other has a bald head and neck. Through shaving of such bald spots were forbidden in the law. The practice was common. This extreme mourning is urged upon Zion because of what would happen to the sons of your delight. This is taken to refer to the pampered children of the palace, the cities and villages, the armies of Judah. And Micah is using, let me give you this too, Micah is using the so-called prophetic perfect verb tense, in which what is future is so certain that it can be described as already past. All right. Appreciate it, y'all. I sent you a little test out. It needs to come back by next week. All right. See y'all. Same time, same place next week.